My first introduction to secondary school initiated me into the world of Shakespeare for the first time. And I remember that the play, as it had been outlined for our then intermediate certificate, was The Merchant of Venice. Something struck me as quite peculiar in the dealing with this play. We read it through as a class, and I was in that frame of mind at the time as a child, I suppose, that once you read it, you had read it. I mean, you know how it starts, you know what the middle's like, you know what the end is like. Job done. We were going to fly through the work for the intercert at this level. It was unbelievable. Couldn't believe it. So try and understand my confusion then, when the following week they decided to go back and do it again. And again. And having done it 3 times, again well knowing at this stage how it started and how it ended, they started to take bits out of it to discuss what each bit of it meant, how it reflected upon the characters involved. And I'm sitting there scratching my head saying, look, a story's a story. What's the problem? And I suppose if I were to characterize much of our journey through Lent, it is that we've heard it. We know it. So why do we keep on about it? What's it all about? And I think in particular this morning we come to one of those classic Lenten readings, the story of Jesus going to be with Lazarus, Martha and Mary in Bethany. Not long after Lazarus has been raised from the dead. We know this story so well. So why go back to visit it again and again and again and again? Well, I think the reason is that every time we go back there, we discover probably something that's new each time we go back to this story. And in a sense, what we need to do on a day like today is almost imagine we don't know how the story ends. We don't know the story of Good Friday. We don't know the story of Easter Day. And imagine we're coming to this story for the very first time. What do we know if this is our first reading? Well, we know that Jesus has been in Bethany before. We know that he raised Lazarus from the dead. We know that he had walked into a situation of dire disaster for this entire family, and he had transformed it. And as I shared it with the children in school this week, we also had the opportunity to visit that wonderful, shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. Lazarus is raised to life. The domestic scene in Bethany is restored. The family are together again. And we're back in Bethany for what looks like a dinner party, a celebration, a thanksgiving. And yet, behind it all, Jesus has been preparing his disciples. What lies ahead will not be pleasant. What lies ahead for each and every one of them is going to be so heartbreaking and concerning. He has warned them that as he makes his journey to Jerusalem, it will be his last journey before he is put to death. We know all this even on a first reading. So into this dinner party that's heavy with an atmosphere of anxiety and concern and worry and what lies ahead. this deeply stressful environment, Jesus is there. And as he partakes of the meal, Lazarus is in his appropriate place at the head of the table. Martha is caring for all the guests, and Mary is nowhere to be seen. But she makes an entrance. She comes into this environment with a jar of perfume. Just imagine now, a year's wages in your hand. She must even been trembling as she brought it in. She brings it into the party. She breaks the jar. She pours the perfume, a year's wages, all over Jesus' feet. And then she wipes his feet with her hair. It might have been a moment of release and relief to those present. She was reflecting on something that nobody else there wanted to talk about at all. She was indicating at that very moment that Jesus himself will die, and as an act of the most extravagant thanksgiving, she pours this perfume on his feet. Looking at this story, going back to it like the Merchant of Venice or whatever else we want to do, we take a look at this and we see all these emotions at play. Tension, worry. You're at a party, but you don't feel like celebrating. Your heart is heavy. You're worried about the future. And into this comes this moment where Mary breaks this jar. The air is filled with perfume, and this heaviness is lifted. Of course, it's not totally lifted. The accountant is present. Judas Iscariot. This is dreadful. All that money wasted, going down the drain. Could have been given to the poor. Think of the good you could have done. Judas, who dips his hand into the till and takes what doesn't belong to him, is probably more concerned that he won't get a slice of the action for himself. Jesus turns on him and tells him that what Mary has done is an act of great, great love and care. It's a beautiful thing. If he has concerns for the poor, he will have plenty of time to look after them. But in the meantime, in the time that lies ahead, in the short time that lies ahead, the views of those around him must be on something quite different. Into this atmosphere of tension comes an extravagant act of love. It's so far out of what people expect that they're shaken up and they're shocked by it. But in a way, isn't it only true that in the same way as Lazarus being raised from the dead becomes a picture of the events of Easter Sunday, so the breaking of that perfume jar becomes a picture of Good Friday. Because extravagant and all as that gift of that jar of perfume was on that day, nothing compares to the extravagant, loving will of God as he pours out himself upon the cross and dies for those who need him most. All of us. within the world of the past, the present, and the future. As we reflect upon that extravagance, and as we look in microcosm at the story of the events of Good Friday and Easter as they are played out in this little village called Bethany, we do well to reflect upon what lies ahead in these days as we again revisit the story we have heard once, twice, numerous times, of how Jesus will be taken to the cross, how he will be nailed there, and how he will hang there for the world that doesn't recognize him. And having done that extravagant thing, he will call all of us to himself and say, "You are indeed forgiven, and you are called to my side." And in that moment, we are all redeemed and restored forever. So it's worth going back to take a look. And no matter how often we go back to that small dinner party in Bethany, we will find something new to see. But at its very heart, it's a story about the extravagant love poured out for someone else, and a reflection upon the extravagant love that is poured out for you and I in the love of Jesus Christ. So let us make our journey in these last days of Lent in the steps of Jesus himself, and reflect upon the powerful things that he, in God, has done.